I raised the question whether the sorting, let's say by education or any other characteristic, is efficient. And the usual, a common argument, I wouldn't say usual argument, but an argument that sometimes made, saying it isn't efficient, is to go along the following lines. Suppose you had perfectly positive sorting by education level. So top educated people marry each other and so on. So you just work down the educational distribution. That's basically what you have when you have positive sorting. And it may not be perfect on one characteristic like education, because people have multiple characteristics, and there's search in the marriage market. People know exactly what all the characteristics are of other people. But that's basically what you do. That's how you should think about it. Okay? Is this room making it?
It's not working in the whole building.
It is. Okay. All right. So, raise the price. You really like the course. So the thing that you sort downward. Now, suppose now I think, well, if I improve my education, I can jump over a lot of other people and marry. Let's say everything is before marriage. This is example decision making. I could jump over other people and marry a higher educated spouse. Everybody might be thinking about that. So we all increase our educations. It's a waste of resources. Okay. So that's the argument sometimes made, that these are rankings. You match by your ranking in the educational distribution. And it's often said when you match by position, positional goods it's sometimes called, you don't have an efficient outcome. So for example, everybody's income, utility depends on their relative income. Well, if you double everybody's income, they work harder and harder, you double all their incomes, and nobody's utility, let's say, is any better. Maybe it's worse off because they're working hard. The relative positions are the same. Even that argument you have to be careful about, but that's sometimes, and you can make that argument rigorous. But it doesn't apply in this case. And why doesn't it apply? Anybody see why it doesn't apply?
Because
One of those for me? I'm the teacher, right?
you're just slicing.
Okay.
Beyond that, though, your utility for marriage is just a function of who's marrying. It's also, when you increase your education, you also increase the total pie in the marriage. And we talked about.
But I know you do, but how do you know that? I mean, that's also true to a lot of externality questions. You partly increase the total, but you have external effects. You're lowering the welfare of everybody else.
Well, I mean, I guess first of all, it's not really an externality. And we talked about earlier that you're going to receive your marketable product in marriage.
Well, but are you lowering the welfare of everybody else?
Not necessarily.
Well, are you lowering the welfare? Let's say you're a man, you increase your education, you're lowering the welfare of other educated men?
Yeah, you probably will lower the welfare of it.
You will.
But you'll increase the welfare of women.
You'll increase your welfare. Do those exactly cancel out?
They should.
Well, no.
Well, I mean, you're also increasing your own welfare.
All right. By how much? I mean, you're all on the right track.
Right.
You're on the right track. If in this market, and I mean, I haven't really gone into the determination of prices in the market, okay? But remember the equations one had to satisfy in order to, with transferable utility. This will, and I'll show you in a moment, this won't be true if we don't have transferable utility. The transferable utility, and we have some pi that's produced in each marriage, Zij, and let's say we distribute that between the male, so the Zi plus Zj. J as the male, the ith male, and the jth female. Okay? And we must know that ZIM plus ZIM, so the ith male, plus the kth female, what they're getting in this sorting must be greater or equal what they can get together, what ZIK, right? So if you look at their imputations in this equilibrium, what they're getting must exceed what they could get by combining with somebody else. Okay? What each one of them is getting is greater than what they could get by combining with somebody else. Right? So no two people could combine and make them without making at least one of them worse off, but one of them is worse off, they won't combine. Okay, so from that, you can then show well, what's going to determine what people get? Well, if there's only a finite number of people, the imputations aren't fully determined, because you can see if you add it to a constant for all male and subtract that from all females, you still have the same equilibrium. All right, so it's not unique. If you have a continuum of people, then you can see, let me try to give you an argument why the marginal product is going to be true. Suppose you had a lot of men and women, and let's say you had more men than women. So some men are going to have to be single. We have monogamy, so they're going to get the income when single. All right. So what is the income? Men who are identical to them, who are married, must get the same income as these people getting when they're single, right? The men who are a little better will have to get a little better income, right? Otherwise, the person they're married would prefer to marry. If they're getting a lot better income, the person would prefer to marry this marginal individual, right? Going to only a little better. So as you work up from the bottom like this, you're going to see each person is basically going to get the marginal product, what they add to the total. That's what they're going to get. Okay. So if I add my education, and I look at remember we showed that the sorting is going to maximize aggregate output. So once you know that, you know there's no externalities in the problem. Right? You can see that immediately from that. So you're going to maximize aggregate output. It's an efficient outcome. So if I increase my education, if I increase the total output, I get that increase in total output. Yes, there'll be redistributions across other people, but that's what's called in the externality literature pecuniary externalities. So if let's say I increase my demand for potatoes, let's say I raise slightly the price of potatoes to every other demander, that's an externality, but it's not an externality that causes any inefficiency because it's a redistribution. The suppliers get more, and the other people have to pay more. Not just a redistributing of the pie. A pecuniary externality. In general, under competition, pecuniary externalities does not cause any inefficiencies. They're just transfer payments. So that's what we would have here. We'd have a transfer payment. The women would be better off. Not all women necessarily, but let's say you have more educated men, then the educated women are certainly going to be better off. And that's going to percolate down, so that pretty much all women are going to be better off. Yeah, you got a question?
I was just wondering, is this any different than like the job market or any other situation like this?
No, it's the same fundamentally. People think it's different because you're matching on order. We don't usually think of the job market as matching on order. You can think of that, good firms match with the good employees, right? That's a matching on order. You think of it that way, it's exactly the same problem. Because you don't have one-to-one matches and so on, but that's, I think, a more technical detail. We don't usually think of that. When we think of the job market, we think of the supply of labor and so on. But when you think of the marriage market and other matching, you automatically think of matching on order if you have positive sorting or negative sorting, matching negatively on order. And so you think that it's something, something not going to be efficient. That's why people have gone wrong in that problem. Any comments, questions? So, yesterday we had I'm not going to go into what we had yesterday, but we had a speaker who gave a paper at a workshop on how you can retrieve these imputations, okay? Or what do you, if I use a little disjunct notation, UIV, the income of the ith male with the j female, plus Bij, the income of the U's are for males and B's are for female. Now, how you can retrieve the UIVs from not knowing anything about the production function, the thing underlying all of this is some production function process, let's say education males, education females, where we say, you know, Z of M is greater than 0, Z of F is greater than 0, and with positive sorting, you have to have ZMF is greater than 0. Cross derivative spot, that's crucial, complementary. But suppose we don't know that function. All we observe is the matching. And who's single, including those who are single, that's important now. Can we retrieve the distributions of the U's and V's? Well, not, you know, up to some multiple you can't do it, of course. But can you say, for example, the benefit to males of getting more education is greater than the benefit to females from getting more education in the marriage market? And generally, you can't do it. I mean, just looking at data on who's matching with who, let's take the case where you have everybody is perfectly assorted of matching. Perfect assorted of matching, nobody's single. How are you going to retrieve anything about the G's from that? You can't. Okay. Now, if some of the females, let's say you had more females than males, so more females are single, well, then that's going to give you some information, because the greater number of females is going to knock down the incomes of all the other females to some extent. And then you look at the actual matches, but still, in general, you can't. So, I mean, I don't really understand how they're doing it, but it's a lot of functional form and special assumptions, what they do. They don't have a general result, I'm sure of that. But still, I mean, it's like you're getting something out of nothing. And the idea, not knowing anything about what the Z's are, other than you have this equilibrium, can you retrieve what the benefits are from increase? Can you retrieve? Can you be able to tell that U, I, J, U, K, K minus that is kind of greater than U, K, V, V, K, K minus V, I, J. That is the gain to, this is the gain to a female in equilibrium from going from a gain to a male from going from an ith to a kth, and is that greater than the gain to a female from going from an ith to a, okay, yeah, that's it. Is that greater than the gain to a female? I mean, in general, you can't observe that, right? The increase in the income, this is the income of males. This is males. You are males. B is females. So this is what the male would get in the equilibrium matching. Let's say it's along the diagonal. This is what the equilibrium female would get. This is what the equilibrium male would get with ith education, this is what they would get with kth education, and this is what females would get with ith and kth education. So it's high school versus college, let's say. So, I mean, I think it's very I'm sure it's very sensitive to some very strong assumptions. But it's an important question, and you know, I've argued that the gains for marriage are greater for men than for women, in just from looking, not being able to decompose this, so we're looking at the probability of being or getting married for men with a college education minus the probability of men getting married with a high school education doing something comparable for females. Like, that's relevant. That doesn't give you the U's and B's, but it tells you something that's relevant about their singleness. Okay? So, anyway, I just thought I'd mention it to you because there's a lot of literature. The marital sorting question is a very active one, and a lot of it is related to the educational issue because people are trying to understand why female education not only has gotten closer, female likelihood of going to college has not only gotten closer to that of male likelihood, but now it's exceeding it. So they simply wanted to argue that the gains to females from marriage has gotten closer to the gains for males. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that women with, a lot of education in the past were much less likely to marry, and so on. So, I mean, the evidence, I think, is pretty intuitive that the gains for women in getting a college education in the marriage market have gone up, but are they greater than those for males? That's that's what's not clear. All right, so now let me take a different example. Suppose we didn't have transferable utility. Okay, now I'll take a very special, strong case of non-transferable utility. Now, transferable utility means you can decompose the pie into the sum of the amounts going to male and female. Suppose you had this following problem, structure. The ZIM is equal to ZJF is equal to ZIJ. But they both get the full output. So a family good. Suppose you had children. That's your main output of the marriage. They both like the kids and get utility from the kids equally. And so that's what they have, okay? Or they're living in a house and they're both using the rooms and it's a family good. That's a strong assumption. It's the opposite extreme, okay? And suppose you had that. So they each get the total output. Sarah Heller?
Yeah.
I am. So what do you think?
About getting equal output
Okay.
and sorting.
Well, these getting out. What kind of sorting do you have?
It's going to be a strong complementarity, right? Because you're going to get the minimum of anyone's production.
So what would you expect to see? I mean, I haven't said anything about, what producing this output.
Seems like there's still complementarity in production.
Well, what do you mean? Let's say this is all you know. That's all you know. There's no complementarity.
Still seems like you should get positive sorting.
What?
It still seems like you should get positive sorting.
No, suppose Z is independent between what the male produces and what the ZIJ is independent between what the male and female produce.
Oh, well then there's no gifts to marriage?
But there's no gains to marriage, right? In that sense, Z is independent of what's being produced. That you have a male and you have a female. Now, you sum these up. There's no complementarity, no substitution. So you had substitution. That the cross derivative is negative. What's the cross derivative? I'm going to say this production function. G. Less than 0. Even stronger than independence. I think you're thinking along the right lines. Have more confidence in what you're saying.
Don't work out.
All right, anyway. You get perfectly positive sorting. No matter what, basically. Because think of the following. You take the top male and the top female by education. Now, they can reduce, it's true that Gij is negative, let's say, but it's still true that, this is true, but it's still true that Zm is greater than 0 and Zf is greater than 0, right? No contradiction between these two things. One is a first derivative, one is a second derivative. Well, all you assume is the first derivative is positive. First derivative is positive. Well, the first derivative is positive, then the maximum total output that you can get is by matching the male and the female. That must be true. Anybody question that? You question that? Yeah, okay. No. Right. It must be true because the first derivative is being positive. But if the maximum total output is when the top people sort, and if they each get that total output, then obviously they want to sort. So you eliminate them. They sort with each other. Now go to the next top. Well, the same thing. Taking the top guys out, they produce the biggest output of everybody remaining, so they sort. You work downward. Usually in these problems, you work downward. You work downward, and you end up at perfectly positive sorting. So in this particular case, you have almost the opposite assumption. Instead of having you can transfer, between the z's, instead of having something like this, you transfer between the z, zf, zm, dollar for dollar. You have something like this. There's hopefully getting something like that, the actual z. That's not quite the right diagram, but something that they're getting the actual z that's being produced. Nevertheless, you get it's a stronger case of perfectly positive sorting because it doesn't depend on second derivative. Transferable utility, you get positive sorting only if you have a positive second derivative. In this case, you get positive sorting as long as you have a positive first derivative. So, complementarity is an important assumption if you believe there's an important element of transferability among utilities. That if one spouse gets more, the other gets less. So you linearize that relationship in the utility terms, you get like transferable utility locally. Okay? Questions about that? So the notion you can get positive sorting is more general than simply the complementarity notion. Well, that's what's usually assumed because one usually says, well, this is too strong a picture. Yes, there may be family goods in the household. That may well be true. But there's also private goods. One spouse can have more leisure, the other have less leisure. One spouse can have more food or clothing or other expenditures, the other has less. One spouse can watch sports and the other can watch love stories. I mean, you have a lot of room for, altering the terms of the marriage. So even if sort of there are family goods like children, as long as you have enough things that you can move around, then you can have effectively the outcome like transferable utility, or this simple assumption. Okay? All right, so if you have any other questions on the marriage market analysis and the role of education, ask me those. Not going to shift to something else now. So any questions about that? I'd like to speak about now is go away from education some, speak about on-the-job investment and specialization. I'm actually going to do that for a few lectures. First starting out with the individual, then looking at some kind of market equilibrium. So kind of general equilibrium. So after people finish their schooling, which is what we've been speaking about, you know, they get married, so we've handled that question. But they also go to work, and either in a household or marketplace, I'll be concentrating on the marketplace. And in school, you learn general principles, economic analysis, microeconomics, you know, laws of physics and chemistry, whatever. And then when you get on your job, you have to take those things you learn and make them into something specific that's relevant to the job. So you may be trained as a doctor, but when you intern in order to get a practical knowledge of how to be a doctor. That's what you're doing when you're intern, right? You work in a hospital or a resident, and you see patients, and you learn how to apply the knowledge you learned in medical school to actual treatment of patients. And an engineer, you start out, you're trained as a electrical engineer, but then you go to work in the automobile industry and helping with the electronics in a car. That's very specialized knowledge. Yes, your general knowledge as an electrical engineer can be useful, but you have to spend some time investing in special knowledge for the issues involved in cars, using computers to give all various information the car gives, including maybe telling you when there's another car in the neighborhood and warning you if you're getting too close to a car and so on. Okay. So computers increasingly being part of modern automobiles and being a crucial part of modern automobiles. And that would be true in every industry. So you take your general knowledge, you convert it into specific knowledge. That's what is sometimes called on-the-job investment or on-the-job training. Okay. And it will vary. It usually be specific to a particular industry, like automobiles, steel, computers, or teaching. Or to an occupation. Teaching it as an occupation rather than an industry. Universities is an industry, cars are an industry, software production is an industry, construction is an industry, and so on. And your skills are specific by occupation and by industry in particular. But generally, you acquire a lot of this early on in your experiences. So in early experience, you're learning a lot on the job. So after a while, though, you become specialized. So if you look at a bunch of people coming out of a college, they look similar. 20 years later, in terms of work, they're very different. Somebody may have gone into finance and is a financial analyst. Somebody else may have gone on for a PhD in psychology, so they're a psychologist. And you can keep going. PhD in psychology is additional education, but then they get additional training as a psychologist. Or if they just graduated in college, one goes to be a financial analyst, the other goes to be trains more as an engineer, becomes an engineer. Somebody else works in the publishing industry, and you can go on and on. And they look very different 20 years later. Because they've invested off of different trajectories. That's why they look so different. A lot of the investment occurs early on. So as I said, we call that on-the-job training or investment. Now, there are two models of this, where learning by doing and when there's an explicit investment required. They really don't, I'll show you, they're very similar in fundamental structure. So in one, you automatically learn from working. It's not uncommon, so you work as an intern, you learn something. The other, you kind of take some of your time when you're working to get more specific skills, and then you have that knowledge. Okay? Now, one of the problems with dealing with investment on the job is a data problem. Now, why is that such a problem? Christina Yang, where is she? Yeah. Christina.
That's to do with selection.
With what?
Selection.
Selection? Well, there is selection. There's something more fundamental. If I asked you to tell me, how much training is there in the U.S. economy, aside from education, on-the-job training? Where would you go to look that up?
Maybe administrative data.
Okay, you'd go to a company, you say. Good. And what would you look at in the companies? You studied accounting, right? Not really, but well, maybe you should have. What would you look at in companies?
Maybe they had a line that said training.
What? No, have you ever looked at a company balance sheet? You have. Okay. What do you know? Would you find a line that says expenditures this year on investing in my workers?
I don't think
No, you won't. You won't. Or if you look at the wealth of the company, you won't find a line or lines that say how much the company has invested in its workers. And the reason you don't find these lines is that companies are not required to report how much they've spent on investing in workers. They can deduct that all as labor expenses immediately, write it all off. With capital, the reason you find lines is how much I've spent on capital equipment is because I have to depreciate that capital for tax purposes over time. But for tax purposes, I can deduct all my expenditures on human capital. And so companies may have some internal books that they keep, but they don't publish those sort of books. Or maybe they should be publishing them and have a better information. How much are they, what's the rate of return on their investments? A lot of companies say they're investing a lot in their workers, but you ask them what's the rate of return, they usually don't know the answer to that question. Yeah.
How would the companies even know? Because, I mean, it's one thing if you send your workers to a training seminar for a week and you can say this is what I spent on that. But there's also, I mean, you're gonna learn more if you have certain jobs than others, even if you're doing things that are productive for the company.
Learning by doing.
Right, exactly.
All right. I was going to show you how the company would know that. Just hold that for a moment.
Okay.
Good question. But they can know that. Anything else? So the companies aren't required to keep this. If they weren't required to keep capital accounts for their plant and equipment and other investments, they would might not keep those as separate accounts either. They might do it for their own purpose or maybe not. They're required to do it because they have to depreciate that over time. So they have to know how much capital do I have now? How much did I buy last period? And therefore, that means I can take off this amount this year for my taxes. They don't have to do that with human capital. Now, they should be keeping books on this and should be knowing what they're getting. It's a puzzle to me why more companies don't keep internal information on that. But mostly they don't. All right, so it's hard to get that information. So economists have to be a bit of detective in this, in estimating it. Sometimes, you have data in various surveys that say how much time do you spend at training, and so you have that data. People try to construct estimates from that, or companies may have some records on how much time their workers have spent at training. This could be explicit training, or it could be, the workers are learning while working and they're not that efficient, so you have to try to tease that component out. And I'll show you how you can do some of that. Now, if workers paid for their training, how would they do it? Well, an obvious way is they get lower wages while they're being trained. Okay? So, and what's their benefit? They get higher wages later on. So if you think of the following. suppose if I didn't take any training, I would get this. So this is by age, let's say, or experience, or tenure. These are wage rates. Now, if I take training and I'm paying for it with wage, I'll get a lower wage to start with down here. And later on, I'll get a higher wage. And whether it's a good investment depends upon the comparison of those two areas, discounted, right? So if I'm paying for my training, and the worker's paying for it, the most direct way they pay for it is by taking lower wages while they're being trained, maybe over a series of years, and in return they get higher wages later on. That's a very simple idea, but it's very fundamental to understanding what goes on in the training market and in the labor market more generally. Now, I had training occurring at younger ages. Why should that be? You don't know? Yeah.
Oh, that way you have a longer period of time to.
Okay, you have a longer period of time to collect it. That would be certainly one factor, right? And if you want to become more skilled, you might as well become more skilled quicker rather than later for partly that reason. So there's more years remaining, and it may be necessary in order to work to get your skills, in order to work at various jobs, you have to get them right away. So it makes a lot of sense. Just like you get education when you're young, you get your training when you're young. Now you notice what this does is it gives a slope to the age earnings, or experience earnings profile. You steepen it. One of the important properties if you look in labor markets is that older workers earn more than younger workers. One interpretation of that is it's because older workers have made more investment in their on-the-job training, and as a result they're more skilled, and they are more skilled. Older workers are generally more skilled. And maybe the very old workers, their skills appreciate and their earnings go down again, and you do find that some decline in earnings at later ages. So skills depreciate. You can invest, but they also depreciate. So it's pretty simple to understand why age earnings profiles slope up with a human capital model, and you can estimate the degree of, from this you can invest. If this was your picture, then without knowing you can kind of get an estimate with a little maneuvering of how much is being invested at different points in time. Like initially this amount would be invested. Later on, you got to be a little more careful because your potential earnings may be higher. So, knowing something about that, how much investment and what it does to your earnings, then you can get an estimate of how much is done here and here. And you add those up. Okay. So it's not quite the area on that triangle that determines the aggregate amount of investment, but you use that triangle to estimate. That's how people have done it to some extent. Looking at what they could be getting, what they are getting, make the difference being the investment they're currently making. And that's fundamentally what's going on. Okay. Now let's take the case of learning by doing. Okay. Yeah.
Those future returns, though, they also have to be discounted?
Yeah, everything's discounted. I haven't said anything what the rate of return is, right? I just said you're getting your benefits later on, and you compare the benefits with the cost, discounted benefits with the cost. So yes, higher the interest rate, the bigger the effect on future earnings for any given investment. That was true in our education story as well. Nothing different about that. They definitely have to do discounted. Okay. Anything else? Now let's take learning by doing. So you might say, and reasonably so, that in many jobs your productivity rises as kind of an automatic byproduct of your work. no explicit investment is being made. You're just working, and that leads to more earning. Those in 301 or 302, when we did learning by doing models for the job, what we're going to be saying now is pretty similar to what we said there. I don't remember where we went into the equilibrium outcomes. But that's what we may have, but we're going to do that now. So some people have said, well, the whole idea that there's a cost to investment is nonsense. There's no cost, you're just getting it automatically. So let's say the model that these people have in mind would be something like this. Maybe this is some alternative W. You take a job with learning by doing, maybe this is your profile, LBD. Start out here, but you get more and more productive as you accumulate experience. Okay. So it looks like a free lunch. But we know in economics there's no free lunch, right? I mean, that's one lesson we try to teach. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Okay? So you have to find but sometimes the cost of the lunch is hidden. Somebody may take you out for lunch and pay for it, but it doesn't make it a free lunch necessarily. Right? So you have to look for where the costs come. Right, so where's the cost? How do we get costs? Yes.
Maybe the product on the price of the product goes down.
Well, maybe the price of the product goes down, but we don't have any. We're just in the labor market here. But in learning by doing, and in firm learning by doing, that certainly would be relevant. But we don't have that here. But it's the right track. Just apply it to the labor market. How would you apply that to the labor market? Suppose you had two jobs. These two jobs. One job here is no learning, you get a flat earnings profile. The other job, it's just the nature of the job. You learn and you get more productive, and it's competitive system. I mean, I could fill out the analysis, and you earn more.
So then if you were to price, so like a lot of workers to that job.
Right, and then you have to look at the market equilibrium. That's what eliminates the free lunch. Everybody would like to be in that better job, right? At that profile, but by going in, they knock the profile down. Instead of getting the wage that one gets in an occupation, the function of how many people are in there and other factors, right? So you have more people coming into the occupation, the marginal productivity goes down, and wages go down. That would be the way the competitive market would operate, and any market, certainly competitive market. So the equilibrium might be something like this. Looks pretty similar to that case, right? Equilibrium. So is there a free lunch? No. No longer a free lunch. You pay for it by taking lower earnings early on, even though everything is automatic. Everything is completely automatic. You get your lower earnings early on, and then your productivity is rising, still rising, so you have to get higher earnings later on, and it can't be pushed down so far that you're never earning more than the other occupation. You would never do it, right? So again, you're discounting present value. The two earning streams should be the same if you have a bunch of identical workers.
How do you differentiate
Well, it's very difficult to do it. If somebody was, you were asking me, suppose there's learning by doing, does that mess us up? I would say no, because we can estimate the cost. I would say, how is a company going to estimate the cost? Well, at least the workers could estimate the cost, because the workers are paying it in this case. I'll come for a moment to the work company. The worker would say the cost is I'm earning lower thing. That's like I'm investing. I'm investing in my future earnings. And from that point of view, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, from that point of view, it doesn't make any difference. Now, if you want to look in detail, you can say, well, are people going into explicit training programs as opposed to just working and increasing their productivity? That's one way people actually try to separate these two things out. But it's not so easy to do. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
In the case that this investment increases a lot the productivity, that only in
as opposed to.
Let me come to that question in a moment, okay? Let me discuss that now. No other way. So, all investments on the job convert people who have kind of general skills into people with some specialized skill. Now, the question is what you mean by specialized. That's going to be answering your question. You can distinguish the different degrees of specialization. You take a narrow degree of specialization, your skills are specific to the firm, sometimes called firm-specific investments. Okay. You familiar with that? Most of you familiar with that? And all it means is what it says. If the investment raises your productivity in this firm, which is any firm, but doesn't raise your productivity in any other firm. Very strong version, but there may be things. You learn the culture of the firm, and maybe, once you go to another firm, you have to learn an entirely different culture. You learn who are the capable people at your firm. Go to another firm, you have to learn. So let's say I would be here, I know who are the smart people worth talking to on the faculty, and who are worth avoiding, right? And in any job, you learn those skills. Those are firm-specific. And so there's firm-specific investment. Now, if it's firm-specific, by definition, it's only useful in the firm. Right, so let me write down various distinctions. And we'll go. Why is this pointing outward? You have to add up human capital. Okay, then we can say we have industry specific and occupational specific. And general. And these are all somewhat different. As I said, firm-specific, you raise the productivity only in the firm. Industry-specific, let's say it's equally useful in all firms in the same industry. So you learn automotive skills, you can apply them at any automobile company. You learn how to teach at a university, you can do it at Uchicago, or you can do it at Stanford, or any other place. That would be industry specific. Occupational specific, well, you get your training as a doctor, and that's true as long as you stay in medicine. If you take your medical training, you try to become an engineer, it's not going to be very useful to you. Right. So that's occupational. And general training means you can apply it anywhere. Not only within an industry, but outside the industry. Yeah.
What's the exact distinction?
I can't hear you.
What is the exact distinction between industry and occupation?
Well, it's just that some things you learn that are useful in an industry. There's a difference between industry and occupations, right?
So independent of the occupation.
Pardon me?
Independent of the occupation.
Yeah, you could have some joined, that's joint interaction, but this would be a case where it's not independent of the occupation, but for a specific occupation, it's different in different industries. So let's say I'm a mechanic, but I learn skills that make me a better mechanic if I'm working in residential construction, and let's say I'm not very useful if I'm working in some other industry. Okay, but I'm still a mechanic. So that's industry specific. Occupational specific, I can be in any industry. Let's say I learn computer programming, I'm a good computer programming, I can do that for, let's say, work at a university, or I can do that working at Motorola, in a cell phone company, I can do it. That's what I would, that would be the distinction. Okay? And they're all important. You may have some interaction terms where it's a combination of industry and occupation. All right, so these are my categories. Now, what do we do with all of them? Well, let's say if you had something that was industry specific. So I have a skill that's specific to an industry. And now you ask the question, let me come back a little. Okay? So, let's say that I'm going to ask the following question. Nice and comfortable. I'll fall asleep, I think. All right, so who pays for the training? Think of that question. Who pays for the training? How much do I get? Both are relevant. Who pays for it? Now, in the examples I gave up here, I was assuming that the worker is paying for it. So if the worker can get training that's general, take the last category, general training. The worker gets general training, what happens? Well, the training raises their productivity in all, it doesn't have to be literally all firms, but various industries and various firms. And so they'll be, and we have a competitive labor market. They'd be bidding for the trained worker, pay that worker his marginal product, right, in a competitive labor market. And so no firm is going to want to pay for that training, right? So perfectly general training, no firm and a competitive labor market, both are important. Perfectly general and a competitive labor market, the worker has to pay for the training. People say, well, how, there was an old literature. It's just wrong literature, but it was an old literature. It said, look, there's an these bad externality arguments come up constantly. And this was saying, there's an externality because nobody's going to pay for training of a worker in a competitive industry because that worker, once they get trained, they'll be bid away by other firms. So this firm that's offering the training is providing an externality to the other firms that are using it. Common argument, sometimes used to justify, infant industry argument, justify protectionism in order to get training. Well, what would be the answer to that? The obvious answer would be that the worker pays for the training. Now, there may be problems with capital markets and so on, so you can go into those. But as much as possible, the worker would end up paying for that training. Yeah?
What happens when the general training is like complementary to the specific training of an industry? In that case, even the company might be willing to pay for general training. So if there's like complementary...
Let's hold that for a moment. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, but hold that. We'll get to that. Once we get the analysis right, we can hold that question. Anything else at this point? All right. So the workers will pay for it. Now, if the worker can pay for it, then you have you do have a problem. Now, it could be an inefficiency because of capital market increase, but it's not due to the competition. It's not fundamentally due to the competition. Okay. Long-term contracts would solve that, but that could be true in the first case as well. But in principle, the worker will pay for it. Okay. There's no externality. All right. So with general training, you think the worker pays for it, and it shows up in lower wages initially, higher wages later on, as in the diagram I gave. Right? The worker pays for it to get higher earnings later on. Okay? Now let's take the case of industry-specific training. It's useful only to firms in the same industry. It's a competitive industry. Let's start out with two cases. One, it's a competitive industry. You follow me? So what would happen?
I feel like something would happen where the worker pays for a decrease in wages and costs.
Why?
Because in an industry-specific, when you're investing in industry-specific skills, you would, another competing firm in the same industry could just bid up your wage because they haven't invested.
Yeah, because there are other firms in the industry that will compete for your services when you're skilled, so you'll be getting your equilibrium marginal product. But if you're getting that, that's not any different as long as there are enough, competitors within the industry, as long as it's a competitive industry. That's not any different than the general training in that dimension. There will be an important dimension in which they'll be different. Anybody? Anybody has the right answer, I should say. Okay. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if it's an industry-specific skill, then it's riskier to invest in it as a worker. Because I guess it ties to the industry, so if you decide you don't like the industry, you're in bad shape. B, if the
All
industry
right. Yeah. So you may worry about that. Yeah.
Right.
Good. The second point is even more important.
Yeah.
That if the industry goes down, the decline of the automobile industry, reduction in employment in the automobile industry, cutting of wages, you just can't go to another industry and expect to get the same pay you were getting before. You'll suffer maybe a big wage cut as you go out. So if you have industry-specific training, one way to test that would be decline in the industry should mean a significantly lower, well, if you have a lot of industry-specific training, should mean a significantly lower wage when you have to work in another industry. And therefore, you'd be willing to stay in that industry at a significantly lower wage if it declines. Okay? With general training, you wouldn't. You just go to another industry. That's the test. That is the test. Now, it could be firm-specific as well. The industry is declining means individual firms are declining, and would be not so easy to distinguish them, but there is a way to distinguish them. How do you distinguish them? Armin, how would you distinguish them?
Distinguish what exactly? The industry specific?
I mean, you have to speak loud.
Sorry, what exactly to distinguish? The industry specific?
Firm specific.
Maybe transition rates between, like whether workers tend to transition more between jobs within an industry or across industries?
Well, I mean, one, you have to look at different things. For example, if a worker has a lot of industry-specific training, if the worker leaves that job, you expect them to go to another firm in the same industry. If you have firm-specific training, if you leave, won't make any difference. So decline in an individual firm will have a big effect if you have firm-specific training. It won't have such a big effect, maybe no effect, if you have industry-specific training, as long as you have other firms in the industry that are in decline. That would be one set of statistics one looks at. And indeed, people look at that when they look at declines in firms. They do find a tendency. Derek Neal did that in his, basically in his doctoral dissertation. He showed a big tendency when a firm declines. Let's say a firm goes out of business. A lot of the workers tended to find employment in the same industry, suggesting that at least, not that there's no firm-specific investment, but it's suggesting there's a lot of industry-specific. How would you be able to detect from that whether there's firm-specific investment? So you have a firm that closes down, Lehman Brothers. Many other examples. Firms close down. Now, let's say you find that workers will leave that firm because it closed down. They have to leave the firm. A lot of them go to, maybe all of them, go to work for firms in the same industry. Can you say there's no firm-specific investment? How would you know? What would you look at? Eric?
What their wages are at the new firms.
What the wages?
Yeah.
Right, if they're earning the same wage as new firms they got at the old firm, you say then basically it's all industry specific. If they have to take a big reduction, you say there must have been some significant component, not only firm specific, but a significant component of firm specific. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how important this is, but it seems like there's you might take a hit in wages because of specific skills that were only useful in that firm, or you could take a hit in wages because of reputation that disappears. I don't know how
What
important
kind
it
of
is.
reputation?
In other words, I mean, if you're starting at a new firm, they might not know ahead before you show up, are you going to come to work on time?
Well, they see what you, do they know your wages before? Depending on what they know.
Right, I guess that's
I
true.
mean, that would be incorporated into, what you were getting paid before.
Right.
Getting paid wage W, that means that was your marginal product, right, in that firm.
Right.
So they wouldn't have a lot of information about you if they knew that much. There may be issues where they wouldn't know so much, so they'd have to learn that, and then quickly your wages would rise up as they learn that.
Right.
Anything else? Yes.
Isn't there also
What?
an excess supply problem? All these people need to get rid of already have.
Well, it depends. I mean, you got one firm in a pretty big industry going under, and it doesn't have much effect of supply to the other firms. If this is, if you have a small number of firms, one firm goes under, maybe it may affect the equilibrium wages in these other firms. So you'd want to adjust for that supply side, incorporate that in. No, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Short question.
It's similar. I mean, if a firm like with Lehman Brothers or like Parker Anderson went down, if a firm goes down because of malfeasance, that's not really fair to people. But I mean, could that knock the wages down too? Even if
Well, it depends where the malfeasance is. The people in charge of the firm may have a tough time. People accused of the malfeasance would be, because they had kind of firm-specific capital, and that was broken by the action. So yes, I would call that firm-specific. It's all. I mean, or you can say that the market revealed a new characteristic of that individual that is lower price. They weren't so honest and so on. Yeah.
If we go from the general to specific investment, we suppose the cost, to pay the cost, is in the general, we expect the workers are not paying the full cost, but in the firm specific, we expect that the firm is going to pay a higher proportion of the cost.
You're asking who's paying? Is that the question you have?
I'm asking that we should expect that.
What? And that is what?
We should expect that the cost of the investment is going to be, in the firm specific, is going to be what is higher for the firm. I mean, we cannot work.
Well, not the cost here. Let me discuss that issue. Okay. So let's take firm-specific investment. First, before I take that, so you had an industry that was a monopoly. One firm, hiring labor, okay, industry specific. Well, in that case, there's nobody else to go to, and so the firm might be willing to, if it was industry specific, the firm would say, well, I might be, be willing to pay for those costs, but I'll get the benefits. I'm not going to pay them a higher wage subsequently because I'm the only industry that's involved. Okay? Now, the worker who has industry specific may threaten the firm, to leave, but if the worker can only get W someplace else, the threat, all the firm would have to pay was W plus epsilon, and the threat wouldn't be credible that they would leave under those conditions, right? So in that case, with a monopolized industry, the firm would have more incentive to pay for it. The worker may still pay for it, depending upon their confidence in the reputation of the firm that they will pay them their marginal product later on. So the worker might still pay for it. All right. Now we take firm specific. Well, if it's firm specific, and I can't write a long-term contract, then there is a similar problem. If the worker pays for it, how does the worker know that they will then get the higher wage later on? Well, you know, if the firm has a history of paying the higher wages for people getting this training, they have their reputation online, they can attract workers because of that, then the worker may pay for it. On the other hand, the firm may say, well, look, it's tough for the worker to pay for it because of capital constraints. I'll pay for it, but I'll be able to collect the return because they don't have anywhere near equal alternatives by leaving. So you get a bargaining between the two, but it could be you get some sharing of the training costs. And it could be you get underinvestment because of these potential threats. You don't get the optimal investment. That could be as well. Okay. Okay, does that answer what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much, I just say that
Yeah.
if a worker invests in very specific, his willingness to pay the cost in a firm is lower because...
No question it's lower. No question it's lower. But if he has enough confidence in the firm, he will be willing to do it. You know, firms establish reputations. They're hiring late workers over time. It's a reputational problem, the usual.
Has the risk of that.
I can't, yeah.
He has the risk of that thing goes down.
Well, he has a risk, yeah. He has a risk that the firm may go under, right? He definitely has that risk. Just like in industry, you have the risk the industry goes under. Maybe the firm can bear that risk better than the worker because the firm can diversify over better, more easily than the worker, right? So that would enter into it. Now we have occupational specific. Well, if the occupation is used in a lot of activities, then that's like general training. And you may not stay within the firm, stay within the industry. The work will tend to have to pay for occupational specific training. So interns don't go paid that much, partly because they're learning skills when they're interning in a hospital they can use in any hospital. Now it also may be because of the monopoly power of the cartel of the hospitals, but that's a partly, and I think there's something to that as well. But even without that, you can see why the workers would get lower wages. They would have to bear a lot of the cost of doing this, because as long as they had mobility across hospitals, which they do. Most doctors who intern at a particular hospital end up generally working at another hospital. They don't stay with the same hospital. So when a university, as I say, attracts an assistant professor to a top university department, let's say economics, Chicago, one said, well, we don't have to pay you. Maybe a not so good university is offering you more, but you're going to learn a lot here, you'll get a better job later on. So you should be taking a lower wage. Right? It doesn't always work, but it should work more than it does work, I think. Because you are investing, and it does make a difference. And you spend a year at Harvard, or, I mean a few years as assistant professor at Harvard or Chicago or Stanford, MIT, you end up usually getting a pretty good position later on, even if you didn't quite make it the place where you started. And it makes a big difference if you started at, let's say, Ohio State, which is a pretty good department, but not one of the top departments. Then, if you don't get tenure there, it's going to be harder. Now, you may not be as good, so you have to sort that problem out. But you do learn more the better department. You learn how to do research, etc. So not a direction, you can look at, sort of estimate the type of training involved from two different types of statistics. You look at wages, which we discussed, or you can look at turnover. So what you observe in the data is that turnover of workers is very heavy in the first 2 or 3, basically highest in the first 6 months. Turnover of workers from a firm is very heavy early on in their experience at a firm, and is much less later on. And similarly for industry turnover. Somebody said, you may try an industry, you don't like it, you move to another industry. But after a while, you're likely to stay in the same industry. So turnover is relevant. Regardless of who pays for the costs, let's say if you have firm-specific investment, regardless of who's paying for it, if you think the outcome is efficient in the labor market, the efficient outcome should be the worker stays with the firm. I mean, other things are saying the firm doesn't go bankrupt and all that. I invest a lot of my training at this firm. Okay, we have some workouts in combination, but by definition, my marginal productivity is higher at this firm than elsewhere. So the equilibrium, if we think the equilibrium is efficient, this firm should stay, the worker should stay at this firm should hold on to this worker. That's the efficient outcome. So, I mean, I've thought the idea of quits and separations, that's the wrong way to think about this problem. I mean, quits and layoffs. It's separations that counts, and you get separation when it's no longer efficient to stay at the same relationship. And the same thing would be true for industry specific. It's more efficient to stay in the same industry, so if the outcome is efficient, you would think in the competitive labor market you would tend to get efficient outcome. You stay in that industry. Unless you're pushed out because the industry goes way down. So that's how you should think about the labor market outcomes. You know, who's going to pay it will affect the shape of the wage profile, no question about it. But you have this other implication about turnover. Should be very robust. Turnover should be very robust. If I'm not turning over much from a firm, that means it's something firm specific. Not turning over much from industry, it means it's something industry specific. It's not only for labor, it's also for suppliers, and a whole supply chain, including the labor market. The same suppliers are supplying particular industry mean there must be, let's say they're supplying capital. The capital must be specific to that industry. I'm stamping out automobile body parts. That's the automobile industry, right? So it's important to look at both sides. I mean, I'm going through a lot of this stuff quickly, and maybe in some of the other labor courses, people go over more detail. I'm not sure of that, though. But it's pretty simple once you understand what's going on. If you think starting out at the first approximation, things are efficient, then you can work out a lot of implications. Yes.
So, Rick, can we separate cost and benefit in this investment in the sense that maybe it doesn't raise the benefit, but it lowers the cost for a worker to invest in, knowing more where who have to talk to the students?
Lowers what cost?
The cost of doing the task they have to do every day. I mean,
Well, that's a benefit to the firm. I mean, that raises the worker's productivity.
so yeah, so we always link them.
Well, yeah, I would think so. I mean, unless you give me, maybe it lowers the disutility to the worker. That raises the worker's real productivity, not necessarily the monetary productivity. That's how you have to think about it. Absolutely. Anything else? All right. Now I want to use this analysis in a different direction. To look at it as some kind of aggregate labor specialization. So I indicated workers become more different as they age. It's very systematic, but it also depends on an economy's needs and technological possibilities. So the way now I want you to begin to think about this, there's an economy-wide division of labor. Specialization. Some people specialize in occupation A, some people specialize in industry B, some people specialize in firm C, and so on. Some people have general skills who can move across industries. And then the question we come to ask, well, what determines this equilibrium outcome? Workers may start out with different abilities, cognitive and non-cognitive abilities. They may produce differences by investment. And so what kind of equilibrium do you get when you look at the combination of the different investments they produce, maybe the different talents that they have, and the different needs of the economy? That's the big question. I'm going to reduce it to more manageable proportions. All right? And the basic thing that's going to drive a lot of the analysis, and I'll just mention a few things and then we'll finish. The basic thing that's going to drive the analysis is that investments in human capital are an increasing returns to scale activity. So, one, increasing returns to scale. That implies specialization. So you know if you have increasing returns to scale, people are going to be into specialized. Because it's more efficient to do one thing or a small set of things than to do everything. But people are going to have to specialize in different ways if you want to produce what the economy is demanding. So they're going to be different. They're going to produce differences. They're going to look very different. Even though they may start out looking very much the same. Indeed, I'm going to mainly deal with a model where everybody's ex ante identical. The Adam Smith model. And then show that you get this specialization and division of labor as a result of the incentive to specialize. So that's what we'll start on next Tuesday.